slideshow in like 5 years, but there's one nice thing about the slideshow, which I think you can see after you watched a few of these on PowerPoint. They're real clear, so I'm hoping that everything will look real nice for you today. What I won't be talking about is you're going to be really fortunate tomorrow to have Tim Kirk here. And Tim and I go back to Long Beach State in the 60s.
Yeah.
He did some of the original Tolkien calendars, actually before the Hildebrands took over on that. And Tim has been involved heavily with his brother Steve on the closest we've ever gotten to Discovery Bay, which is Tokyo Disney Sea. So you're going to get a really great presentation on that tomorrow. And also, unfortunately, I don't have anything here on the long-lost 20K exhibit here at Disneyland. Wasn't able to find anything that wasn't already in the e-ticket, and also, pulled out for the last go-round. So I couldn't, in the DVD, that's what it was, because they rated our our library for that. Anyway, but I think what you'll find will be fascinating. I'm going to start with Walt Disney World when I was a child there, and then we'll go to Paris and go into some depth, a complete walkthrough on the Nautilus. And then we're going to spend the second half of this with Discovery Bay. So I think it'll be enjoyable, and let's get started. So as I said, we're going to start at Walt Disney World. Now, when I came to work for the company, we were just going into construction at Walt Disney World, and I was just fresh from 5 years working at Disneyland, scooping ice cream and working on the rides. And I landed at Imagineering, which was WED, with Claude Coates, who goes way back and did a lot of the things that you may remember from the animated films, going back to Snow White. He did many of the backgrounds. There's some great Pierre Lambert books that have some great prints of Claude's original background. So Claude allowed me to, and tapped me to go down with Dave Burkhart to Florida and install the 20,000 Leagues attraction in the opening of Walt Disney World. So that, and this was my first job. Now, as you watch this go on, you'll see those boats go from that gel coat color there of green, which is what they were all produced in, to, I couldn't stand that. It was like what Jody did for this masterpiece up here. When I saw that in resin about a month ago, boy, you made it look terrific with the paint you put on that. And that was my first job, to put the paint on, I think we had 12 of them in the back there. And again, I like it dark. It's a bit dark. It's less intimidating. Anyway, so my job was to do that. I was 23, 22, working with people that were, twice my age, and it was really scary. And I think the first thing that gave me a little bit of confidence is when I picked up the first trowel of cement that I'd ever held in my life, and worked with them to try and create the lost continent of Atlantis area where we had a tile wall. And I went down there and I threw the mud, which we called it, on the wall, and then I showed them how to break a corner of it off. And it worked. I just stuck the trowel under the cement and it fell off onto the floor. And I said, leave the piece that fell off on the floor and just now to use that and do that all the way around the set. So I could hardly wait to get out of there because my heart was racing that I'd given someone directions, and I could hardly wait to get away. And so I came back about an hour later, and every fourth row, the fourth tile up from the ground, had the upper right-hand corner broken off all the way around the room. I said, see, I did it perfect, So then we had to go in and redo the entire room, and I realized what supervision is for. So anyway, that was the first job. And this is how the load-unload building looked just prior to opening day in Florida. And we got the water in, but we didn't get the ride going. So I was there from April until about December, and we were up and running about 3 weeks after the park opened to the public. Then I went back, since I was the guru on 20,000 Leagues at 22, when I was 25, I was sent back down there, and we realized that we raced so fast to get it open that a lot of things weren't right, and so they took the ride down almost for the whole year of the American Parade, because I think I saw that every day. It was from 75 to 76. And it was so extensive that they did this really cool graphic out in front proclaiming how much better the ride was going to be. So let's take a look at some of those scenes. And when it said more color, you know, I was accused of, you know, I was in charge of getting the color on the thing, and we knew what the Florida water is so blue that it just about kills everything other than blue objects you put in it. So we created what a lot of people would come through saying, what are you doing here, a bordello? You know? And I said, no. When you see this underwater, you'll be amazed and shocked by how much color is removed by the chlorine and just the Florida, you know, blue sulfur water. If you look closely, you can see a lot of the cool little things. I think there's seahorses that are attached there on the red coral. It was really an elaborate redo. This was the best, I think, either of the two rides ever looked when we came up from this rehab. And we really wanted to make you feel like you'd gone somewhere, so the different regions were exaggerated in color. So the green area out there was a kelp forest, and then into almost a pink coral reef, and then into the deep water where you can see divers and a underwater oxygen generator machine that were styled very closely after, you know, the Jules Verne 20,000 Leagues movie. This is the end area of the ride where we're coming back into the dock from the also abandoned Skyway ride. Lots of things aren't important. Now this is how it looked shortly after we opened. This is the second time. Now again, look at the submarines from now on and you'll see what we're able to accomplish. It's not a small task. Now, you know, when we talk about finding Nemo, can you find Nemo in this one? I guess we're just way ahead. We knew it was coming. It's not a while. And the other thing we brought was mine. If you've ever been to Walt Disney World, one of the biggest problems there is seagulls. And I think it was because we put in this audiotronic invitation. We even had seagull poop all over the rocks there, and you know, nests and everything. It was like a, hey guys, don't go all the way to the coast. We've got a great place here, and there's French fries. Anyway, I don't want to claim the credit for that one, but and here they are in all their glory. There were 12 of them. And that's kind of the finish that we were able to get on those green boats. And I thought they looked really nice. We couldn't get any of the brass things that we would have liked to have done because they had to work in fiberglass paint and all of that. But they came out pretty nice. And there's one of my favorite stories was down here. This was so big you could get inside of it. You could crawl through that tube from near the rear end of the thing. And we had guys down in there cleaning up all the trash that had fallen down in before we filled it with water. And one of the guys climbed inside of the serpent and up to where the control was that turned the head left and right and rotated the eyes. And so what he did, he spent about a half an hour subtly pointing the head of the serpent at the guys cleaning on the floor. And no matter where they moved in the room, the head would turn and the eyes would go. And all of a sudden, these three guys hightailed it up the ladder and came outside. They said, "We ain't going in there again." You know? And anyway, so that was a fun thing. Again, that was something one of Claude Coates' designs. He was a great man to work with, and really cared a lot about 20,000 Leagues because he had done the first one at Disneyland, the submarine ride, which, by the way, would have been 20,000 Leagues, except General Dynamics was only willing to put up the money for it if Walt would give in and change the boats to look like, you know, the atomic-powered submarines. But it's funny, now that we've seen all the bits and pieces and outtakes from the movie that were on the Incredible Laserdisc, you can see all the places that were in the ride were also considered for the movie. So the North Pole and the Blacklight area were all part of the original plan for the film. So, all right, we're going to go way into the future now. So that was back in '71. Imagine if they said, you can build a Disneyland and you can have anything in it you want. And that was kind of the enviable task we had. It was a little bit more difficult than that because we were going into a country that was not as open and friendly to Disney the way that Tokyo and the Orient is. The Orient pretty much anything you do at Disney is going to be a hit over there. They just love our products and they eat it up. And in Europe, it's interesting. I remember one thing that kind of give you an idea for what the impression of the French people was. After visiting, one of the people I'd gotten to know, his family said, well, you know, it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be, you know. So that was kind of what we were up against going in there. So while we did have a pretty free license to put the pieces together from the other three parks the way we liked it, you know, we knew the audience was going to be very, very demanding and tough. So anyway, this is sort of what we came up with. Now, I'm not going to give you a tour of the park. I just really like the hotel we put in the front entrance. So instead of going through ticket booths to get in, you go through this kind of magnificent inn. And we did it because we felt the French wouldn't have an affinity for a American Main Street. That wouldn't really mean anything in terms of home. But an inn is friendly, it's hospitable, it's a place that you come and go to. And so we thought, what a great statement. And also, about 165 days out of the year, it's pouring rain over in France. So we didn't like the idea of thinking of people out there with an umbrella fishing into their wallet for money to get in. So before you get to the ticket booths, which are inside of this hotel, you have to go inside, and it's warm and nice down underneath the hotel there. So this subject is about Jules Verne and the Nautilus and 20,000 Leagues. And as part of the commitment, the French gave us an incredible thing. I mean, it's right out of Jules Verne. You can now go from the Waterloo station in London directly to our front gate in 3 hours by going under the tunnel, And it doesn't stop at Paris. We got signed off by the French government that we would have a train every single day that bypasses France or Paris and goes directly to the front gate of our park. So you put your luggage in the train over in London, and when you get to our park, you go right into the park and the luggage is taken to your hotel room, and that's that. So it's an amazing thing. But part of the payback was that the French wanted an area of the park devoted to French culture, and we could think of nothing better than the marriage of French culture that Walt Disney had already begun with Jules Verne and Walt Disney. So that started the idea of Discoveryland. And obviously, as you'll see later when I get into this stuff, we didn't build for Discoveryland. This is an idea that had been working in our minds since way back in the 70s. And so while it may have appeared to the general public that it was all new and like, boy, you know, how did they come up with that? You're talking about people that have been living and dreaming about this idea for like 25 years when we finally got the chance to do it. So this is one of the very early renderings that Tim Delaney did to showcase how a land that basically would carry the banner of the kinds of rides we do in Tomorrowland would look if Jules Verne had envisioned it. And it contains not only Jules Verne items, but Leonardo da Vinci and H.G. Wells and maybe even a little George Lucas. But it was an idea where all the great dreamers from all times would congregate and present their wares and their adventures for the guests in one tidy little place. Now, when I got my job up at WDI, in the annual reports the years prior to that was a movie that was coming up called Island at the Top of the World. And there were little bitty postage stamp size renderings of Peter Ellenshaw's magnificent matte paintings and so forth that have been realized for the movie. And so I began to dream with my magnifying glass looking at those that would make a really good portfolio piece to get a job at Imagineering, you know, because it's my favorite kind of thing. And it looks like if ever there was going to be a 20K2, this seemed to be it. So I did a whole portfolio of visions for what an Island at the Top of the World attraction would be. And I presented that as part of my portfolio when I went from working the rides at Disneyland to Imagineering. And it was a good part of why I got the job, because it talked a lot about the artwork and things you'd see along the way, but I also had quite a bit of engineering expertise in what I was showing them. So they thought the combination, you know, Imagineering, it was a great combination. So I was hired into the model shop and went to work there in, like I said, the beginning of 1970. But by 1976, I'd gotten itchy to bring that portfolio piece to life. Now, this was just before the movie came out, so I got busy on doing Island at the Top of the World as the centerpiece for Discovery Bay, which you'll see later. And then the movie came out, and as you all know, it was not one of Disney's high points in film. So right away, whenever they've got a great big movie in the studio that isn't doing well, I wouldn't want to be at DreamWorks right now with Sinbad. If you had a Sinbad ride, I can tell you right now, it wouldn't be going anywhere. So all the exciting things for Discovery Bay kind of got put to bed. Now, flash forward 20-some years. All the people that had anything to do with that movie are long gone. And we brought out that magnificent boat shape and presented it in a new rendering to Michael and Frank and the gang. And they said, wow, that's really cool. And of course, they probably never even saw Island at the Top of the World. So it became kind of the mascot of our opening day venue there. And here we are with the actual building, how it looks at night. It's quite spectacular. And again, you know, I think this and Tokyo Disney Seas are absolutely the most detailed parks we've ever done. So you're going to get a good look at that tomorrow, and I'll try to take you through some of the detail work here in Discoveryland today.
What does that building house?
You're going to see. This is a close-up of the cab for the Hyperion, and there's even animatronic chickens in there that's part of the movie that you'll see as you get. I don't think I have them in this picture, but they are there. And then when you get inside the building, it is almost as though it was an airport, and each of the different continents represented there is actually a different food window bay. So you can go and have Asian food or European continental or American and so forth. And then when you take your food away from this area, and all the condiments are in those weird trucks. You know, that looks a lot like what I saw last night. Did anyone go last night to see? Yeah. So I've got Jules Verne, you know, I've got Nemo on the brain again. You know. I didn't like the Nautilus though. It looked like a giant knife or something.
Too white.
Yeah, and then the inside was all curved, but the outside was all straight. So I think they stole a little from us. But anyway, when you take your food into the restaurant beyond us, which we call Videopolis, and that was because we were doing a deal with Philips, and they liked the idea of having something kind of contemporary. And there's a huge arena here where a lot of the big daytime spectacle shows are staged, like Mulan was staged in this area. It was a spectacular show in there with, they brought in the Chinese acrobats to perform the theater show. They do a really good job over there with the theater pieces. They're all on a caliber with the Aladdin show that you are probably familiar with here at Disneyland. And next up is the Visionarium. This is the 3D Circle Vision show. And this is the pre-show. And I don't know whether you can see it in this picture or not, but hanging from the ceiling is not only one of the Hyperions from the movie, but Tom Sherman gifted us with not only a Nautilus, but one of the lighter-than-air ships from Master of the World. I think that's just over on the far side. I think I actually brought a pointer. And it's in sea green, because I hate red. Yeah, that's the lighter-than-air ship there.
Where's the movie?
I don't think I've got it in this picture. I couldn't tell from looking at it on my little bitty, but it's hanging from the ceiling. There's all these great, you know, flying crafts from different eras on the ceiling. And this is the area basically that counts down the minutes till you go into the show. In this show, we meet Jules Verne on film, and then in the room we have a robot named Nine Eye, who is sent through time, and Jules Verne is captured back in his time zone and brought forward into our time zone. And then the main bulk of the movie is Jules Verne's reaction to how Paris and Europe has advanced through 100 years since his time. And it really gives you a great perspective for all the things we kind of take for granted. Looking at someone like that who was such a visionary, and yet never got to see any of the things. Imagine Jules Verne in a helicopter. Imagine him riding on that train that goes under the tunnel and comes up to Euro Disney. We use all of those opportunities in the film. And one of my favorite shots, and remember this was back 11 years ago, we end the film by going way into the future, and we have a flight through one of the girders on the Eiffel Tower. So it looks like you're going to go down under the arch, and instead it zooms up and shoots right through one of the girders on the Eiffel Tower and then off into the future. And they got some pretty big talent on this, Jeremy Irons and so forth. So it was a good show. It still is there. Nine Eye was built in Imagineering, and we used some Pepper's Ghost effects, so there's like illusions in the room, and it really took Circle Vision as far as I think it's probably ever going to go at this point. Boy, Piccoli, I can't think of his first name. Michel Piccoli, yeah. All right, the big attraction we weren't able to put into the budget for opening day, but I think it was good because we were able to do it right, and it opened about 3 or 4 years later and kind of relaunched the whole park, and we went definitely into the black because of this. And the reason why is it was the first thing that could really be marketed sans Mickey, without Mickey. Everything else was Mickey and castles and fairy tales and all that, and the public kind of said, well, why do I want to see that? But suddenly this marketing campaign started out with it being called Discovery Mountain, which I wish we'd kept. But then, of course, all the marketing people said, well, we already have a huge investment in Space Mountain. So the banner was striped off with the bottom part there, and Space Mountain was put in. But if you look around it, when you walk around there, talk about hidden Mickeys, you can find a whole lot of hidden Ds when you get over there and ride that attraction. But they had some stunning advertisements for this in London. It was the only country I could understand them, so when I was there I could. But the idea of being launched out of that giant cannon that Jules Verne depicted in From Earth to Moon and fired, up to the moon itself was so well dramatized in the marketing and everything, and so European, that this was a radically different way of marketing the park. And I think it really shows that if we ever were able to do a Discovery type place, how well received it would be by the public, and it doesn't have to have Mickey Mouse associated with it. So now we were going forward. You'd seen that first rendering, which was sort of before we really knew what we were going to do. And then this was the next version, which begins to really finalize the look of what the mountain was going to look like. You might also notice kind of an unassuming little boat there in the foreground, kind of snuck in. And Doug, this is Doug's piece here in the front row, Doug Hartwell. And I hate to tell you what the final resting place of that model is. They took it over there for a marketing meeting, and they were carrying it out into the park, and as usually happens on a gusty day, a bit of wind came up underneath the lip on that green top piece, and it flew away like a flying saucer. And we never got funded to do it again, did we? We never returned it.
I got all the parts.
Yeah, it came back in pieces. Now the idea was that we were going to load you into the barrel of that giant rocket, and it's, if you think of Space Mountain here at Disneyland, the top of the ride is about halfway up the actual height of the cone. You start going down before you've reached the top because you're looking up at the stars projected on the ceiling. So this was radically different. We are on the outside of the building, and we're going to go way above that point and onto the top, and then puncture the top and enter the building itself from a hole drilled right into the very top of the cone. And that allowed us to have twice the energy that we have on the one at Disneyland, which translates into 3 loops inside the mountain. And here was a good color study on it. Look at the size down here of the gas to get an idea of how big that is. And whether you ride it or not, people just come in there and their jaws drop when they look at it. And the whole thing recoils, and then the barrel, as a vehicle loads in there, the barrel comes down and shuts. And then it builds up its energy, and then it recoils, and a big burst of steam comes out the end as it launches the vehicle into the ride. And talk about something living up to expectations. That's how it looks at night. And one of my favorite things is to be in that hotel we put at the front of the park and open the window if you get a view side room, and you can just watch the thing, sitting there every 18 seconds. off it goes. And we didn't want to just do loops, we were calling them orbits. So every time we invert you go around an asteroid. So that's sort of what's going on in there. However, you probably never know because you're just closing your eyes and waiting for there's a second lift in the middle. So after we get you down to the bottom, it goes up again inside there and repeats the whole process. I'll never forget on opening, it was David Copperfield and who's the model? Not Michelle.
Claudia Schiffer.
Claudia Schiffer, yeah. And the two of them were riding with the president of Disneyland Paris, and he hated roller coasters, but he had to do this PR thing. So they come out after the first ride, and I saw Philippe with beads of sweat on his brow, and they were going, wow, that was great. We'll never have a chance like this again. Can we just go around without getting out? And they said, oh, sure. And we smashed it again. A third time, again. And after they came out, and Philippe had to meet the press at that point and say, oh, it's great. I think I could do it about 3 times, but it is pretty aggressive. It's one of the most aggressive ones we've done. And it was the first roller coaster attraction to introduce onboard sound. And you probably all heard the music. We use it here in California on the Observatron element there that goes off every 15 minutes. And it's a beautiful score that was choreographed to each of these loops and dips in the ride. So there we are. Now we're going to move down in front of the mountain, and opening about a year before we opened the mountain was something we put in as an added capacity project, and the timing was just right because Tom Sherman was available to work with us on that. And I will feel always glad that we were able to let him fulfill the dream that he always wanted to do, and that was to build a genuine, full-size, living, breathing Nautilus. Now, Nautiluses are not just to be found in one space. One of the fun things about Discoveryland is you can wander around and find hidden Nautiluses in the walls and the murals and the tile and everywhere in that land. So it became kind of a motif, shall we say. But the real star is the one that's right out in front of Space Mountain. And this was, again, I think Tim's first sketch of how that might sit in place in front of the mountain. And this is a view you won't get. This was standing on top of Space Mountain while it was under construction, looking down. Now, if you look at this building, I shouldn't give this away. The ride was very shortly going to open, so there was a sign here that said "coming," any day now. And you enter this kind of lighthouse structure here, and you descend by spiraling down. And we put enough curves into that so that by the time you get to the bottom of the stairway, you don't know which way you're pointing, and it's in the dark. So we hoped that you'd go around so many times that you think you're pointing here and going on board the Nautilus. But in fact, you're spiraling around and going back into this building over here, which is out of sight, and nobody knows it's there. And it's pretty darn effective because I know I know the geography of it, so I kind of am aware of that, but I still find myself getting confused as you go on board. And now this is down just about at the point where you go in the door looking up at the cannon and so forth in the background. And this is one, I'll have some more of these tomorrow, but this is Tim Delaney, who was the Discoveryland art director, and Tom in the center. And you can see the wheel behind and the Hyperion out in front. So the two of us got out, but Tom, I think Tom would have stayed in there overnight if he could. And so here it was with the sun going down. If you look closely, you can see that red jacket in there. He wouldn't get out. Anyway, that was the crowning glory. Now, of course, Tom was a perfectionist. And when I first met Tom, it was almost his last day at Imagineering. It was my first day at Imagineering. And I met this grumbly guy out in the back who was so mad that they weren't doing the things the right way that he was getting up and leaving, as he did many times. He'd clear his head, then come back to Imagineering after a couple of years and work a little while longer. He was a perfectionist. And so the first thing that we told him, if he was going to get his dream, he had to level out all the rooms so you could, roll a chair or make it accessible to everybody to get through. all the rooms in the Nautilus. Well, he goes, well, it's on 3 levels, and that's going to ruin the whole thing. But we said, come on, Tom, we know you can do this. You can make it work. So he goes, well, all right, but I don't like what I'm doing. So he, this was his first pass at leveling out the Nautilus. And if you've ever seen his 11-footer, I think somebody has some reference material to that. You'll see absolutely the best version of the interior. I was so disappointed that the DVD didn't use that. They came and photographed it, extensively for the DVD. It was going to be what they used to fly into the different rooms that were on the tour of the Nautilus. I think it would have helped you understand where they were, because nobody ever figured it out. Even Harper was amazed by Tom's dissection of that and placing the rooms in the relatively right places. Obviously, in the movie, they never had to make it work. And of course, those things really frustrated Tom, and he was determined to put the thing together and make sense out of it. So given all the givens, this is what Tom came up with. And so as we enter, we're entering down here, which we see the ballast and the corridors leading to Captain Nemo's stateroom, and then the spiral stairway that goes up to the wheelhouse and the chart room, and then past the diving chamber, and then on into the grand salon where we had a big show of the squid, and then a disaster, as in all great Disney ride strikes, and we've been damaged, so we have to make a hasty retreat through the power room and engine room at the end. So here's just as we come in from the spiral and absolutely disoriented you. We come into the rear end of the boat, which is where the ballast room appears here. We've got obviously the little Kirk Douglas ukulele there, ode to Harper Goff, who was an expert at it. And we're looking straight on now into the ballast chamber. And in a minute here, we will now be. Did they do a nice job on aging all this? I mean, some of these sets look like they were the original movie sets. Tom literally lived over there at Tahunga while this was in production. Now we're looking back. This is almost from near the entrance to Nemo's room, looking back at the ballast chamber. So you're walking backwards, we're walking. And now we're turning from that pivot point, looking to the door into Nemo's chamber. And here is Nemo's boudoir. And we try to get Tom to spend the night on that. And I said, go on, you're never going to get the opportunity. Take a good cigar and just go in and chill out tonight. And he was, I don't think he ever did it. I think he had a couple of friends over. Some of you might have been part of it. And they had kind of their own private party on board while it was still assembled in Burbank. But anyway, this is Nemo's chamber, a little bit further on down. Now, there are obviously accommodations in all of this to make it capable of handling guests and being guest-proof. And even with that, as I told you, we're in France, and we've had 2 huge vandalism attacks on this boat. And when they finally caught the guy, it turns out he's a university professor who hates Jules Verne. So it wasn't kids like it would be here in California, but a highly educated man who felt that he was doing the world a service by destroying the dreams of Jules Verne. He did it twice. The same guy came back and did it again.
Was he ever arrested?
Yes, but it's real. Disney, has a problem with, making a big federal case out of stuff like that. So, yeah. And in France, you're on somebody else's territory, and they feel they have freedom of expression that's a little bit stronger than here. And so I don't know what they've done. I think he was arrested, but whether he served any meaningful time or not. But a lot of those display cases and everything were wiped out, destroyed, and so we had to rebuild it like 3 times. What would you say, sink area here. There's some other little details. I guess, yeah, it is. If you look here, and I'll show it to you in a minute, that's one of the stair treads from the main spiral stairway that goes up to the conning tower and into the lower depths of the Nautilus, and that is from a casting that Tom procured from the studio long ago. Thank God he kept a lot of this stuff. Now, this is an actual stairway, but the procurement that Tom did resulted in all of Tom's friends getting, let me see if I can find it here. Could you turn the lights up just a bit? If you knew Tom, you know, he'd come over and say, well, I got something out in the car that I think you'd like. So here is one of the stair grids.
Oh my
You
God.
know, yeah. We weren't able to use it on this because that is a store-bought thing and it would violate the integrity. But Tom was so insistent that he used it in Captain Nemo's chamber. And I think in the movie you'll see it in the same place on that same little cabinet shelf. It's the same thing, but this is a casting from that original model. And thank goodness Tom did manage to procure some of these things, or believe me, there wouldn't be anything. Okay, now we're looking in the chart room. Again, we took some liberties here. We took kind of a variation on the stuff that Peter Ellenshaw did here to kind of orient the guest to what Volcania was with this piece. There were little touches where we kind of went beyond the movie to make it, you know, guest friendly. The lighting fixtures in particular in this are spectacular. I know I couldn't afford them, but boy, I could have done a room at home in these lighting fixtures. I think you might see a couple of them if you look carefully, but they weren't just, you know, drilled holes in the ceiling. They were really, really beautiful. So here we are looking now from the stairway into the chamber. There was an indication if you looked up of the wheelhouse, but it wasn't fully realized. Just some of the detail. And I don't think this could have been built if it wasn't for Tom, because you're talking about someone who carried in his mind this entire style. It was like second nature to him, so he knew how to take care of any inconsistencies or things we'd have to do to make it, you know, fit. He just knew how to bring out the right thing so it all blended together. So you seamlessly go from something that was right out of the movie to an interpretation to make things work together. And there was the chart, the equipment on it. Now we're looking kind of from the exit area of this back to where we came in. To the chamber. Let's see, did that one have? Let me go back there. Did it? No. I'm going to try and find one of those lights for you. Okay, here we are in the diving chamber, and we have a effect down there that bubbles up periodically and kind of floods the floor. And the lighting was emanating from up beneath the water, so it has a really neat, eerie kind of water effect there. And now we're about to enter the Grand Salon. This is looking back again to the diving area, and now I'm going to spin around. And, oh no, we're still looking back. Now that's an end view, one of these incredible lights, but they're right out of the vocabulary of a lot of the gauges and things that were so spectacular in the movie. And the lighting manufacturer picked right up on that and was able to interpret that into what a lighting design would be in the same style as those magnificent. There's one. Look at this. Can you imagine that in your den? And they're done here in California, so if you twist the guy's arm, they'd probably be able to, if you got $10,000 laying around.
If we have his phone number.
Yeah. And of course, there's the organ piece at the end. And we added an effect into that, which has Captain Nemo's image appearing and disappearing. Now, this room had a timed 3-minute show, beginning with the organ music, and then the iris on the window actually opens. And there's a room back there that's like 5 times as big as the salon, holding all the iris rings that open. And then we explore with music kind of the depths of the ocean. We have some fish and so forth. And then all of a sudden there's an alert, and the squid comes forward once and then is repelled by the charge. And then the squid comes back with a very forceful piece of music and grabs onto the boat. And the beak is snapping at the window, and there's strobe lighting with and we blow the repellent charge, and then all the bells go off in the cab, and they go evacuate, and there's steam coming out from around the organ, and we have to go out through the steam into the engine room. Now, the problem is everybody would watch it over and over and over again. And the traffic bottleneck, so they came in and they edited it, and it's really unfortunate because now it's just sort of a loop of the squid coming back and forth at the window and so forth. I'd love to put it back in because now there isn't the crowds that were there when it first opened, so we could stand to have it more exciting. Now this is from the movie. I just thought I'd give you a looking back from outside, and there again you can see the piece that was used for the model of that lamp. I believe still that the specimen case is at the studio, but nobody has seen it lately. But keep an eye out in the movie The Haunted Mansion coming out this fall, because that sedan there plays a big part in it. So I got to sit in. It was over on the Haunted Mansion set, so that's going to be in the movie. And here we are at the organ, and like I said, it does have a piece that plays to start off the 3-minute sequence in there, and that still is in the shortened program. You can see again one of these lighting fixtures up here, and from the other side, I think you can kind of make out the image that we put in there. We had to obviously strip back all the details of the fountain and everything in the walk pass because of the need to get, normally it's a solid chain of people marching through, so that's what that's for. And then finally the end of the show is in the engine room and the great power source. So there's the walking beam kind of from a bad angle. It's kind of hard to get enough away from it to get a good view on this, unfortunately. And then the power source, but we weren't able to use salad bowls because, of course, everybody comes through and tries to bang on it to see if they're salad bowls or not. So believe me, they're, I think, like stained glass. So that's our tour. And now, the second part, I promised you, I think will be the most interesting. It's what isn't built. Discovery Bay. This came about in the early 70s, kind of tied up with that whole thing on Island at the Top of the World that I told you about. And I was sitting in my office and I thought, I'm going to do a drawing. And it was one of those, Imagineering has peaks and valleys where we're either laying off people and everyone's scared they're going to be out of work, or we have so much work and not enough time for people to do it. So this was in one of those, we're scared we're going to go out of business modes right after we opened Magic Kingdom in Florida. So I thought, well, I could put rides in, and I've proved myself at that, but we're not doing that anymore, so I better get busy painting something that shows I can come up with ideas. So this came out in about 1974 with no real support idea-wise for it, other than I knew my Island at the Top ride, Island at the Top of the World ride from school. And of course, everyone would love to go on board the Nautilus. And so I just started imagining that San Francisco setting that we were treated to briefly at the start of the movie 20,000 Leagues as being a great adjunct to Frontierland at Disneyland. So, okay, they liked the rendering, so, well, how do you see this fitting into Disneyland? And so this was a very early plan that I did, showcasing, you all familiar with Big Thunder Mountain, and here's the ride. We thought about doing a walkthrough of the Rainbow Caverns inside of Cascade Peak, and that never happened. And then just beyond that was the cider mill, which ironically is sort of there with a stand there where they sell cider and corn on the cob and stuff. And then the rocks sort of became the gateway into Discovery Bay, which most of the city portion was where the Hunchback stage area is currently located. And we were breaking through from the rivers of America and putting the Nautilus up here on this fork, and then parking the Columbia when it wasn't used on the lower fork. The center was where all the main buildings of Discovery Bay were. And then, like we do at Pirates of the Caribbean and Haunted Mansion, most of the rides happened way outside the berm up here, and all you saw was the nose of the attraction for Island at the Top of the World, where you went to the icon and then went on into the show from there. We also had a ride that took you Skyway style on a balloon from here over to the other proposed area, which was called Dumbo Circus, and several other smaller attractions. And then there was a ride out here that jostled from being a time voyage that went back to the age of the dinosaurs, or a mythic cruise that went to a kind of a mythic realm in the back there. And I'll go into more detail now as we go. So I think this one's a little clearer than what you had on the slides over here. But you can see Big Thunder Mountain. This is the B lift right there. And we raised the walk around up in this version so that as you came around from Fantasyland, you'd be looking down over the harbor. We had a lighthouse out here on the point. If the Columbia was out on the river, we always had a boat in dock. We had the streets of kind of a wharf community here, a major Cliff House restaurant on this side, and then two smaller sea-type attractions here in the balloon flight over the surface. Island atop the world, the Nautilus, and the Time Voyage. Now this is the goat with the dynamite stick, sits right on that rock there. So you've all gone up the lift, B lift on Big Thunder, and come back around here. When you reached the top of that lift, we wouldn't need the goat because you'd be looking at this, which would be quite spectacular. And I don't know if anyone, I'm sure all of you know, but the idea was the money that allowed this Discovery Bay to be built was from the gold taken from Big Thunder Mountain. And we concocted a story, which was one of the early Chronicle stories, where Jason Chandler had built a Tom Sherman-style drilling rig that allowed him to rescue a lot of miners trapped inside Big Thunder, because Big Thunder had spirits that kept anyone from reaching its magnificently overwhelming gold vein. And all these miners had been trapped. There was no way to get them out, not before they'd die of asphyxiation. And Jason had this incredible drilling machine, which he broke through, and they thought he was a crackpot, but it worked. And everybody was saved. And then nobody cared about Jason Chandler. He was left there alone after everyone was celebrating the return of their miner family. And so he went in and found that he had now uncovered the world's largest gold vein. In fact, it was so big that if he took it all out, gold would be worthless. So he only took out enough to fund a place where all the strange people that had fought to have their ideas realized. Sounds a little bit familiar with the place we work. Would have enough money and the support to build things that they knew people wanted to see instead of things that were highly marketable. But I think someone saw through the thin veil we put on that. Anyway, here's a few more views looking down into the harbor. We had a lot of shops in that area. There was a scientific shop that was associated with the energy factory, which was a big walking beam engine structure with water and steam and everything coursing through it, and a gift shop that sold all these scientific things that worked off of the principles of creating or giving forth energy, solar and every other imaginable kind. There was a Chinatown over here on this side with a Chinese restaurant and an attraction that we'll talk about in a minute. And then the majority of the Discovery Bay shops were on this side of the street. The Nautilus also had a big restaurant that appeared to be underwater over in this section, and there was a train station inside just before you come out into the land. Boy, they're having fun next door. So here was the entrance. You can see the energy factory here. And this is Jason Chandler in statuary there at the entrance, along with that legend greatly reduced running time onto a plaque. And let's see. Now, I brought this. I know it's awfully hard to see, but Harper Goff was still working with us and was so excited about this. He said, "Let me work on it too." So I said, "Great." So this is an actual Harper Goff, and we're looking from Big Thunder Mountain here. You can see the Mark Twain, I think, out there on the river. And we're crossing over into the town of Discovery Bay. You can see the Columbia and the harbor. and beyond in the distance is the airship. I wish it was stronger, but he worked a lot in pencil, and so that's what you see is what you get. And Harper, I guess he didn't like my old barn. It was too boring for Harper, so this is his version of where the Hyperion would have been stored. And he also added in a neat little kind of voyage down here. I don't know what he had in mind for that, but he had some other excursion cruise running around through the rivers of Discovery Bay. Now, this is where we were talking about the Chinatown segment. It had a restaurant, and then I've never been a fan of shooting galleries, so I thought, what would it take to get me with a gun in my hand shooting at stuff? And I thought, I'm a pyromaniac, so I thought nothing would be better than shooting the fuses off of fireworks and making them explode. So we conjured up this Victorian, what would you say, mechanical conveyor belt firework factory with all these skyrockets and everything running through conveyors and being manufactured, and anything you hit would instantly explode. And it was right when fiber optics and so forth were getting, starting to get big. And so we were imagining it would be done with water effects, sparks, fiber optics, anything we could do to keep it constantly going. And on the roof, this was actually a water fountain show at night. And the water, fell back into the roof cans and then was recirculated. It was all done with lighting, as though all the sparks, a la Mary Poppins or Sleeping Beauty, were coming up through the chimneys and creating quite an effect. So the idea would be to keep that up at a high level, octane look all the time. And I think I actually would have done that. I think that's one of the shooting galleries I would have liked to do. The name Firework Factory has gotten used again and again at Disney. We've got a poster at Disneyland painted onto a fence over by the Stage Door Canteen, and we had a restaurant in Florida, and there's a couple of other places that have used that name. So everybody loved it. It's just we've never gotten to do it right. This is just a detail from that painting, and beckoning there in the distance is the old Nautilus, and in the foreground is the top of an attraction we call the Tower. We'll talk about that later. We're now going to go on one of the big rides here. This is the E attraction. And I've tried to assemble all I can that's left of this ride because it was never approved. It never really went beyond just an embryonic stage. But nonetheless, there's a little bit of work here, and I think you'll enjoy it. Wait a minute, I'm wrong. Before we go into the island atop the world, we're going to dine on board the Nautilus. So the Nautilus had the walkthrough that you saw pretty much, I assume we would have envisioned it similar to what Tom came up with for Paris. And then that concluded by bringing you into a massive underwater restaurant that was in the flavor of the Nautilus, where we would serenade the guests eating in a Blue Bayou type, quality food experience with organ concerts there on so it wouldn't be pipe organ pizza. It would be better than that. Not sauteed on board octopus either. Now this is the Tower ride, and tomorrow you're going to meet Tim Kirk. This is Steve Kirk's first piece that he did for us in Imagineering. And if you get a chance to go over to Tokyo Disney Sea, you're going to see a lot of Steve's weird and strange mechanical inventions brought to life there, and I think you'll get a lot of that from what Tim will show you tomorrow. But the idea here is we went up through the center of this column and then spiraled out around the edge of it, and then all the while all these machines which were demonstrating the new magnificent properties of magnetism began revving up, and this giant magnet then would apparently pull the vehicle up to the top of this thing where it would be held for a few seconds while you're upside down, and then spun off and to the finish of the ride, which was in the dark. And at this time, loops were a very, very new and impressive thing. So had we done this, it would have probably been the first of its kind. And next to that was another small show called Professor Marvel's Gallery. And this was a terrific idea that kind of, well, you're going to see, because I've included a few things here today. This was a show like the Carousel of Progress. Instead of 250 people in the rooms, there were only about 12 standing. And kind of like the Seven Faces of Dr. Lau, the host would say, and now if you'll step through the curtain leading to our next exhibit, and you would jog just a little bit. And there were 12 little jogs with about 1 minute of magic in each one of those 12 spaces until you came back around to the end and then you stepped out. And these were the kind of characters and so forth that Steve had envisioned would be inside that place. And we see Professor Marvel with a host of all kinds of critters and strange collectibles found all over the world. Now, if you know a true Imagineer, we never give up on anything. We always find a way to sneak it back in when somebody isn't looking. And I think you'll recognize those characters in the show. Unfortunately, this show is now gone too, so, you know, what can you say? Yeah, I think we've reached the end of Reel 1. So we will now be shifting over. I guess I recycled this so I would give you the big show for the last one. Go for it. Okay, I think I have one more. And then, there we go. All right, so as I mentioned, there's a transit system that runs between the two lands, this balloon flight. And we came up with a really neat thing. It was a wobbly deal that was counterbalanced with a weight below the ground. And so the drag cord came down from the basket and went below the ground with an equal weight down here, which allowed the balloon to tip back and forth, and you could get it swing. If you're really good, you could go back and forth like a swing set thing as it rolled up over the mountain and down the other side. And I think it would have been not quite a thrill ride, but a real fun one for kids to get in there and kind of see how far they could push it. And here was the model again, showing the track going from the Discovery Bay side here, and it was two-way. It worked its way up to the top of the mountain and then down on the other side. This was a berm, so you didn't see, there was no intrusion from one beam to the other. Now, I knew I had that slide in there to confuse me twice. This time, instead of going on board the Nautilus, we're going to go into the Hyperion. Now, okay, this is a seldom seen drawing that shows you the portion that you've seen on all these models out here, which was basically the loading area. And as soon as we loaded you up, we turn around and go off into the ride in this direction, through into the big finale up here and out. And the story, it was pretty cool. The balloon never moved, but we only allowed you to see the cars that were boarding for the time when they weren't moving. And then we closed big, freight doors that didn't allow you to see the cab leave the area and turn around and go out. And then when the next car came in and parked, then we'd unroll those big doors again, and the next group was allowed to board the next craft. So it was a pretty good trick, and I think we could have pulled that off. And you left in the sunset Discovery Day. There was kind of a diorama in this area, and then it grew dark. And out of the dark came the Aurora Borealis, which was in these two areas here. And then we began to approach the polar ice field. And down on the ice, we actually had like caribou and so forth. And we were going to do that with projections by keeping the animals very small. And gosh, if we had CG, then we could have done it perfectly. They were going to be seen running over these fields of ice. And then, because a surface storm was, or a storm was coming, we needed to dive down too near the water level in order to protect the balloon from being buffeted in the storm. So we dove down to the ice floes, and then we really got up close and personal with a lot of the different critters. Now the storm gets really fierce, and up ahead is only a chasm in the wall of ice. So this was a wall of ice all along here. And the only way out was to go into a narrow gorge that took us into a deeper portion where we found all the pods of whales heading mysteriously, being drawn forward into what turned out to be the graveyard of whales and the gateway to the port of Astrogard, the Lost City. The Lost City is frozen, and we see frozen remnants of it here. And then, surprisingly, there's still one volcanic element keeping a portion of it alive, and also a population of strange creatures that are living in this last remaining vestige of Astrogard. Then, of course, we go in too close to get one of them. We're gonna, I always hate movies where they don't get anything, so we're gonna go in and get one. And we aren't sure whether we do or not because the balloon gets caught in the heat and is carried up and into a spiral, and then that puts us into a violent storm, which of course the captain regains control of and swings us around and into the unload. Now, right, so this was kind of the idea of how that would look. And this is sort of a stripped away view, so you can see the components of it with the track that you wouldn't see because we wouldn't let you see those cars until you got really close to it, and then you have the cars right in front of you. But this is sort of, if we pulled away all the walls and disguises and so forth. And then heading out, we have a host on board. Now this was a monorail with 3 cars hanging down below the track, and it had a gimbal that allowed us to push the vehicle crooked, so it could actually list up to the left or the right. So if we came really close to an iceberg, the captain could spin the wheel and the thing would literally list, so you'd be leaning in your seat as the thing, around it, one of the elements that was too close. A lot of you know Leota, Madame Leota, and the Crystal Ball. These are some of her sketches done in Mark Davis style of what we'd encounter looking down as we got closer to the ice. So these were some of we said Leota, polar bears. Okay, so she did a whole page of what we might do with polar bears. And as I said, we went down into that gorge, into the narrow part of the ice, and because it was so delicate in there, the captain has to shut down the engine, so we're just gliding through. It's dead silent. In the midst of all this, we see incredible crystal formations. And the captain realizes that if any noise happened, instantly all of these would begin to break down, and we'd have a catastrophe in there. And so it's dead silent. It says, don't make any noise, keep quiet, and so forth. And then all of a sudden, the whales lurch up to protect their burial ground and attack the boats. We have left and right, we have these, attacking orcas. And then the boat has to, or the ship has to rev up the engines. So we hear the revving of the engines, and that sets into motion the breaking of the crystal. And a lot of this was done with film projections integrated into the ice scenes. But we also were going to try out something that we finally put into Indy, but they didn't maintain it. The ice fall that we used to create the effect of falling rocks, which worked great for 1 month after we opened. And the guys didn't like going down into the pit that was 32 degrees and moving the ice along if it got jammed, so they just left it jammed. All right, so we come up out of that and we get into the frozen gateway to the city of Astrogard. And what we see are legendary animals that have come as we're getting to an area that obviously has a little bit of heat protecting these animals. Further in, we see a proud father unicorn up on the hill protecting his family, which is just beyond here, mother and baby. And now we start to sense that there's still some volcanic activity, and there's a Pegasus horse, reacting to the fire up ahead from the volcanic activity. And in the grand temple of Astrogard, there's almost a recreated scene from Sleeping Beauty's Maleficent's palace, where we have dragons dancing around the altar stones, which are bubbling over with fresh lava that's pouring out onto the floor. So the floor is lit red, and these stones are pouring out, the lava from it's fed by the volcanic cavity, and that's how the civilization originally kept its integrity up there in the Arctic realm. So this was sort of the heat source for the whole community. The captain feels he can go in and get one of these dragons. He's convinced that he can risk it. The first mate says, no, the heat will cause us to rise, you can't risk it. And of course we do, and we go in and we get blown to Kingdom Come into the storm, which is the third act, was a real roller coaster ride, suspended coaster. And when we get back and we unload on our way to the gift shop, the captain is over on the right side with the creature on his shoulder. So we were actually going to pay it off that going in and risking it was worth it. And we actually captured one of these creatures, and that was going to be kind of an automatronic scene that would be exposed to people as they exited the ride. And this guy was surrounded by press with their flash bulbs, and each time a flash bulb would go off, the creature would react and get all feisty from the flashes. So everyone loved it, and they said, well, it's not big enough. So these I don't think have ever been seen before. This was, if you follow the Disneyland Railroad, it'll tell you, I think this would have been really kind of cool. The railroad comes around the back of Frontierland, and then instead of connecting to Fantasyland, it went and did almost a figure 8 and unloaded back here, and then continued on around past, I think those were small, the Dumbo Circus elements. So it would have been an incredible exploration of the land as you looked out at everything, on that trip. So everything got expanded out, so we had a lot more room to do this. And pretty much that land still exists at Disneyland today. The new freeway off-ramp carved just about to here, but it's still sitting there.
So why don't they do it?
Like I said, people love marketable things like poo instead of. Now this was my favorite because something came out of this one. Yeah, this was not quite the same length of track, but it introduced something brand new. You can see the track is quite a bit different than it is now because we cut across here. So we were going this direction. But what is most interesting about this is this structure, which was sort of like Grand Central Station in New York, and you went to one structure which we called the Venture Port, and you then were able to go to many different realms from that Venture Port. And this is what it was going to look like. And as I said, Imagineers never give up. This was the land pavilion in Epcot that never got built, where we had different crystals for each bio community. So that each one of those crystals held like the mountains or the deserts or the swamplands and so forth. And they didn't go with that. They went with a food story. The craft was willing to put the money up. So it's the same as Walt Disney not getting his Nautiluses at Disneyland for General Dynamics' wishes. We had to give in to Kraft Foods, and so this never happened. But I thought, aha, it would sure make one heck of a venture port to come across from Big Thunder and arrive in this port, and then we had hidden tracks that took you out to the various attractions, and you can see here the train. This would be the train around the park. Coming in here, a little bit closer view of that. There was a balloon ascent in here that actually was a descent. So you went up to the top and boarded it, and it took you down underground where you got into a subterranean story at all these different levels. So it was kind of a flight in reverse down to the center of the earth. Now this is some of Tom Sherman's work. In that venture port, one of the shows he was going to do was a jumbo version of a 20,000 Leagues experience. And we had worked up an idea that used the Haunted Mansion illusion that we have in the ballroom to cross-dissolve, where we could take that ship and make it cross-dissolve into another world. And this was done using carousel theaters back there that were jogging to bring each one up opposite of the other. And then we turned the lighting off on one while we brought the lighting up on another. And it would be as though you went through time or traveled to some other exotic realm. And of course, Tom could never end anything without a squid fight. So the giant squid. And these are not marketing art. Discovery Bay never got to a point where we brought in the guns and did really, the kind of marketing art you're used to. So what you see here was enough to get management aware of what we were trying to do, and it never went further than that. This piece was the grand finale, I guess, of Discovery Bay. Everybody now thought it was so great, and maybe this is like Darby O'Gill when they say, 3 wishes I will grant you, 3 wishes are small, ask for a 4th, and you lose them all. Well, maybe we got too big. This was, instead of DCA, this was going to be Discovery Bay, the park, and it was going on the property out in front of Disneyland, and you came in through an expanded version of the town with an expanded version of Ventureport, and then across West Street in the bowling alley area were 3 boxes the size of Pirates of the Caribbean that you'd be jettisoned from the venture port off into these worlds. And one of the worlds was George Lucas. We were going to take you into George Lucas's world. Another was an alien realm, and the third was an imagination realm. And I can't read if I'm doing that right. Over here on this side was the Age of Invention, and this pretty much inherited all the shows that we had developed for Discovery Day. And then on this side, if you look closely, I think there's an airplane with C-3PO on it down there. And that was the beginnings of the Indiana Jones adventure on that side. This was way, way, way before we put it into Disneyland. And so it had 2 outdoor lands surrounding the lake, exotic ports and the Age of Invention. And then the venture port hid 3 hidden worlds up there that you went to God knows where. It could have been anywhere. The neat thing was we didn't have to have it all on that limited box of property. They could literally take you off to a warehouse somewhere. So that was kind of the big finale. And I included these because these were the first things we did of how Journey into Imagination would be converted into a Jules Verne land. So here you can see the people arriving at the grand central courtyard of the greatest things ever imagined, where the journey into this imaginary world would begin. And the Dreamfinder would now be almost a Merlin, if you will, in this world that would be a little bit looser than what Kodak was wanting us to do in Florida. And of course, if you don't have Kodak, then you can make a Fujifilm colored pigment. And so this was what we were originally planning to do until Kodak, we were showing to Kodak, we were all really proud of it, we thought it was great. We saw the Kodak people there looking at it, and they had very glum faces, and we said, why don't you like it? Everybody likes it. And they said, it's green. And we said, yeah, well, dragons are green. He goes, Fuji is green. So we didn't make him yellow and red, but he did turn to purple before we finally used him. So I think that is where I end up today. And of course, we have a big tribute tomorrow to Tom, so there'll be some more things then. And I don't know where we are time-wise. I can't see a thing here. I do this without my notes. Oh, so I think we're pretty well done. So.
Thank you, Tony. Ladies and gentlemen, Tony Baxter, once again, another big round of applause. We're going to take about a 5-minute break. We are a little bit behind schedule. We do have the room for all night.